Hey Fly Tires, welcome back. My name is Matt and thank you for stopping by the channel. Now today's pattern is truly an American iconic fly pattern. It's the Royal Coachman. Now the history of this fly goes back to 1878. A guy named John Hailey from New York City of all places came up with this fly. He was a professional fly dresser. That's what we called fly tires back in the day. So a client came to him and said, hey, I'm going up to Maine to do some brook trout fishing. Can you tie me up some some Coachmen, but make them tougher for these brook trout teeth? He said, sure. He added a red silk band around it, put a barred wood ducktail on it. Now it was still a wet fly, still had the swept back white wing, the brown soft hackle, but the fly did great up in Maine, came back down to New York. Hailey said, I can make this into a dry fly. He stood the wing upright, put some brown rooster hackle for the dry fly, and a new fly was born. Now, it still didn't have a name, so I envision Hailey was sitting around a pub one night with some of his fly fishing buddies in New York City. That's when L.C. Orvis, brother of the Charles Orvis, said, well, obviously it's a Coachman. It's kind of fancy. Let's call it a Royal Coachman. And they did. And 140 years later, we are still tying and fishing this fly. How about this? Ask yourself, when is the last time you tied a Royal Coachman dry fly on the end of your tippet? We get so intently focused on matching the hatch, like, oh my God, there's a sulfur hatch going on, or trico spinners over here. But think about it. And the next time you're fishing and there is no obvious hatch going on and you need an attractor pattern, think about tying a Royal Coachman on. Don't shy away from it because, oh, it's an old pattern, nobody uses that anymore. They do. People still use that. It still works. It is possibly the most iconic American fly ever. Think about it. When a non-fly fisherman thinks about flies, what do they think about? They think about the Adams or the Royal Coachman, two the most popular flies we have ever created. If you haven't tied a bunch of them up in a while, do it. I'm going to tie a bunch of them up tonight, and I'm going to start right now. There it is in the vise, the Royal Coachman. I'm going to be tying this on a size 12. It is a 1X long dry fly hook. I'm using black 8/0 thread. Lay a base down to the start of the bend. Now there are a couple of different ways, the orders you can put the components on. Some people will put the wing on and then the tail. I find it easier to put the tail on first. So what I will do, find my length, grab the tips, and reach in here with about 8 or so fibers. Snip that, then pull the main feather out. That should keep your tips pretty well lined up. Make it a little bit longer. I like it about a complete hook shank length. So a fairly long tail on this guy. And the golden pheasant tippet, that is kind of one of the signatures of the Royal Coachman. Well, with the red mid part of the body, of course. Now take your thread back up to about the 1/3 point. I think that right there is going to look good. Take 2 slips of white duck feather. Now you're going to tie these in kind of opposite the way you do a winged wet fly. So your thread, hang it from where you want the tie-in point to be, and now envision flipping that up to gauge how long you want it. So I think that is going to be good right there. So a loose wrap and then pull it tighter coming up on this side. That might work. We're going to split them in a minute. But if you can keep them separated before you start wrapping, it will make splitting them a little easier. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap these, the back end, down. So some fairly tight wraps right there. I will lift this up, try not to grab the tail. Now snip in here. If you can cut this at an angle, it might help you get a taper, but it's not the easiest thing to do, so don't worry about it if you don't. Okay, now before we move on to the body, I will try to separate these wings. Just take them with the scissors, pull them apart a little bit. I'm going to lift them up too, also. Put a little dab in here. I don't want them perpendicular, but I'm leaning a little bit forward. About like that, but I'm also going to do a couple of figure eights in between them just to keep them separate. So this is about the only tricky part of the fly. Just kind of wiggle your thread through there. Once, I'm going to do it, that's one figure eight right there. I'm going to do another one, and then we'll probably have to prop them back up. But these figure eight wraps will keep them separated. Okay. So they're separated now. Let's just lift them back up and put a couple more wraps in here to prop them back up. Okay. I think that's going to be fine right there. Now let's take our thread back to the tail. Or almost the tail. We got some peacock herl to catch in. 2 strands. I've snipped off a couple inches of the brittle stuff. So I'm going to bring that right there. Now one trick for this, instead of bringing your thread back up here and wrapping the peacock herl, because then they might end up spreading out on you, I find it sometimes easier just leave your thread back here and let the thread hold your peacock herl together as you wrap it up. It's only going to take about 6 wraps because we're only going to take this back part of the body up to the point of the hook. And see, I'm just pushing that thread forward with every wrap. Okay. I think that is fine right there. I'm going to catch that off with 2 wraps. I'm going to just park this peacock up here between my feathers and then pull some extra on my thread out so I can wrap this. A lot of people will trim the peacock herl when they're between that front piece and the back piece of the body because they do get in your way a little bit as you're tying this. But if you don't mind just having to work around them, it saves you from having to cut the peacock herl and then tying a new piece in. Next component is the red. This is the middle part of that body. It's what makes it royal. Without it, it would just be a coachman. So to get that caught in, try to keep your body flat here. Be careful with your thread wraps. Any lumps will be exacerbated when you try and wrap this red. But if it's flat, it will stay flat and look pretty good. So you can take it maybe a wrap farther up than you think you need, because we can always wrap the peacock herl, just a little bit back to cover up that if we get it too long. See what I'm saying? If that red is too long, you can just wrap your peacock herl a little bit back on it. I think that is probably maybe about the size we want. So I'm going to go ahead and catch this. I'm going to take this peacock herl back, part my thread right there. Now the front should be about the same size as the back. So again, I'm going to try and get I don't think I'm going to get 6 wraps on this one like I did in the back, maybe 5. So I think maybe we got 4 up here, but I'm starting to run into that wing. I think it's going to look fine just like that. And we can always use this hackle to help position the wings. Or as often as not, the hackle will mess up your wings. Just try to be careful with that. Okay, so for the hackle, just brown dry fly, rooster hackle. I've peeled off a bit of the bare stem here. So I'll put a couple of tight wraps behind it. Go up here in front of these wings, 2 or 3 up here. Now we can snip off this excess. And let's put our thread where we want to finish the hackle. So up here about an eye length behind. And I don't think I'm going to need my hackle pliers for this. I've got a fairly long feather. So I'm going to try and get about 3 or 4 behind it. And then just as many in front. So is that 3? Let's go 1 more and see if we can get away with that. Okay. Now I'm going to pull these back a little bit just to keep that tight. Now let's catch this off. I'm going to have some pointing forward. There's not going to be anything I can do about that. I will try. I might just have to trim them. Just pulling them back, you might really start messing up that wing. Like most dry flies, I just push them back with my fingers here and try to capture them. There's a couple poked back out, so we're going to definitely trim those, but I think we can live with this right here. So let's snip off the excess feather right here. Got a couple of crazies sticking forward right there. Sometimes you can just grab them with hackle pliers and pluck them, and then that way they'll come out a little more. You won't leave any stubs, but we've got enough room for our whip finish here. And head cement. So I want to do maybe a 5 turn here. But there you go, folks. One of the most classic of all American dry flies, the Royal Coachman. No classic fly series would be complete without it. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.